This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is the co-creator of a very famous video game, Doom. My guest, John Romero. John has a terribly interesting life and career. I'm a little bit jealous of how cool it is to be in the video game world for as long as he has been in this world, starting age 11. So cool. We cover lots of territory today, from John's early childhood to bringing it up to current time. A lot of interesting lessons in a conversation with John Romero. So even if you think you're not a video game person, trust me, you'll walk away with something where you say, that was useful. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right into my guest today, John Romero. I get pitched a lot of different guests. And sometimes I'll get lucky and someone will say, hey, do you want to interview the billionaire founder of Paychex? And I'll say, sure. They'll say, hey, do you want to interview the founder of Dunkin' Donuts? Well, sure. I'm not even have to think about that. Hey, do you want to interview one of the co-creators of Doom? I don't have to think about that.
That's great.
I don't even look at your book to begin with. I'm just like, oh, that works. That will work in some way. I don't know how, but it will work. By the way, I should offer, you're in good company. I've only had, this podcast has been on since 2012, 1,100 plus episodes, 7 Nobel Prize winners in there, but you're my second video game professional that I can recall.
Wow. Who's the other one?
Nolan Bushnell.
All right. That's cool.
Good company, huh?
Yeah, he's a legend.
Now I'm going to have to keep pushing after I've got number 2 on. So let me jump in with something just as a really big picture point. I think this works with you. By the way, there's a crazy storm out here, so that's why it looks wild. But I think with you, the thing that I take away, maybe at the beginning and the end, we're both Gen X. I think you're maybe a year or a half year older than I am. The takeaway I take from you is anything is possible.
Definitely. That's true. If you put your mind to something, you'll achieve it. At some point, you'll learn how to make that happen.
We can't go through line by line, and I would implore people to read your book, but your story, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the serendipity, the moments for things to happen, and the whole time you're just marching forward. It's pretty wild. Even for you, on reflection, you must have been like, wow, how did this happen?
It's funny because as it's happening, I'm not thinking, how did this happen? Because I guess at the time, I know how it happened because I'm in it. But yeah, I just was focused on what I was doing and got lucky, recognized situations that could be really interesting, kept pushing those things forward.
Let me get you to start at the Leave It to Beaver type family household that you grew up in. The typical white picket suburban.
You're not.
Let me let you define it or comprise it or consolidate it or just give the summary that really brings people into, here you are now. Okay, we can look back, great success. Folks know you and all that stuff and some great achievements. But coming along, why don't you give the young John some of the things that you were dealing with from a family perspective? Because that's the start.
That was one of the reasons for doing the book, was to also just write about my early life growing up and how I got into computers. A lot of people are interested in how does somebody get into computers, especially back in the day when computers were very new to households. A home personal computer revolution started in 1977. So it was a while ago for young people. For me, it was really incredible. I was exposed to computers when I was 11. But before that point, people were interested in, well, where did you grow up? And I did not grow up in a place that had computers. I basically came from a low-income household, poverty, food stamps, grew up basically in the desert in the Mexican barrio in Tucson, Arizona. We didn't always have food to eat, so we'd go to my grandma's. If we didn't have any food, I lived in a hotel for a little while. My dad was an alcoholic. Some of the family was in the drug trade, and violence was pretty much just part of the neighborhood that we were in.
That seems like the sanitized version. People are going to have to go read more.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was not a place where you were able to see computers or focus on computers. That happened after my dad went to the store one day and never came back. Then my mom eventually remarried. We moved to Northern California, and it was a 180. Basically, the environment was completely different. They did have a computer at the local college. That was such a lucky, I guess, that at 11 years old, I got to go to a college hoping there'd be video games in the computer lab. And there were computers. That was cool.
Let me even take it before that, though, because roughly they're about the same age, that late 70s time period. Space Invaders, Asteroids, Pac-Man, these were things all near and dear to me, too. I still remember having to suffer through the Pac-Man version on the 2600.
So bad.
600 is pretty bad in hindsight, but it's what we had. But why don't you speak to maybe some of that feeling of playing video games early? As you're playing those arcade games, was there a feeling even early on of, hey, I want this. I want to know how this happened. I want to know how this was created. Was that feeling happening quite early?
Actually, it wasn't. When I was in Arizona, which was basically up until I was 8 years old, I was playing pinball machines at the time because video games were not out yet, really. Pinball was everywhere. Pool tables, pinball, that kind of thing. Played a lot of pinball. I played it at an arcade that was named Spanky's. And that was in an area in Tucson that was more upscale. Where I lived, there was no such thing as an arcade. It was just bars. My grandparents on my mom's side, they were close to where this arcade was. And so I was exposed to pinball there. Then the very first electromechanical games, which was pre-video games, it was big rolling drums for a racing game where the landscape would roll like this and you'd move your car left and right to dodge the stuff that was on the drum.
I think Seawolf was a really early one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Seawolf, Dune Buggy. There were different games, the early players like Sega, that had created these big electromechanical games. And the size of that cabinet is why arcade games moved into that same cabinet size. Because really, when you look inside of an arcade cabinet, it's just a motherboard attached to the bottom floor or whatever. It didn't need all that space except for the CRT. And that space was normally taken up with the big thing that's moving around inside the cabinet, but they kept the same cabinet size. Pretty interesting. The acceptable real estate in an arcade was that thing, so they could just use it in case they needed more space. They had already eaten it up. Pinball machines, and eventually Pong really was one of the first games that I got to see at home on a black and white with the Sears Pong machine. Then when the video games first appeared in Spanky's, I believe Targ was one of the first early ones that I had seen. So the 70s arcade games really were of a certain early style. They're all trying to figure out how to make entertainment on the screen with limited hardware. And I really liked that. That was, to me, so much more fun than just sitting and watching TV because I'm actively making something on the screen move around and do interesting things. I didn't think at that time, this is what I want to do. After I started learning how to program, that's when I started putting the two together. Obviously, programming is for games. And I love games and I love programming. So why don't I do both of those?
When was your first game programmed? What year would that have been?
79.
That was your first one?
Yeah, the very first one was 1979 on a mainframe computer at the local college. That was 11.
Sometimes you hear the stories being born at a certain point in time, but your story is a little bit different. But still, if you spread it out, this guy has to get this early programming experience, this early gaming experience, and he's going to need maybe a decade or so to really get seasoning. Then something magical has to happen where the internet happens.
It actually happened before the internet.
But the internet being ultimate distribution, which really takes your world to a different level.
Yeah, the internet definitely happened when we released Doom. We released it on the internet that day. Before Doom, Wolfenstein and Commander Keen games, all the other stuff, that was on BBSs, which had been around for a very long time, 20 years.
Your first version of Doom would have been DOS?
Yeah. Quake was DOS.
Okay, but what were you using? I think you were also developing for Apple II and stuff also?
The earliest games that I programmed, which was several dozen games, was on the Apple II computer. And then I switched to the PC in 1989, learned all I could as fast as I could, basically, about the PC starting in 89, continued developing for the PC. I'm still making stuff for personal computers, but it started in 89. That was a lot of learning. But at some point in the beginning of Doom's development in 93, we started developing on workstations using Next Computer workstations.
The foundation of the Apple operating system today, the Mac operating?
Yes, the OS 10, the operating system that came directly from NextStep. We were developing Doom and Doom 2 and Quake, and Heretic and Hexen were also developed on NextStep. And we would compile the code for Doom to run on MS-DOS. We would compile it in NextStep. So NextStep could compile 4 8086 processors, and then we could just run it on our DOS box. So we have two computers. One's the Next computer, the other's a DOS computer. And we compile it here, and then we just run it over here and watch it, play it, mess around with it.
What was the game when you were making enough money personally where you were like, beyond just passion, and I love to do this, where you were unequivocally, this is for the rest of my life?
In the 80s, it was probably before I even left high school when I really got into programming and assembly language, big games in assembly.
84, 85?
Yeah, probably around 84. 83 is when I started getting really good at programming and assembly, and 84 was when I started making bigger games. And I knew this is all I want to do. I just want to do this every day, forever.
Was the money coming in at that point in time where not only did you want to do it, but the money was proving that you were going to do it?
Money was coming in, but it was really very small amounts because I was publishing for magazines. Because basically in the 80s, you would get a magazine and open it up and you would see code in there and people would type the code in to make a game run out of a magazine. It was pretty funny. The money wasn't really coming in at that point because it was just little bits, hundreds and stuff. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. And at some point I was going to get a job doing it. And I did do that in 1987. I finally got a real job making actual money and I could support myself and everything. But then when we started in software and started making our games, that's when actual money came in because we own the company. There's just four of us and we made games that changed everything. Then real money started coming in. That was pretty great.
What year was it exactly? Was that 91, 2, somewhere in there?
1990.
Before I jump into the starting of Doom, so to speak, you've got an interesting, I don't know how you would describe it, as a skill or a condition, and I don't want to pronounce it wrong, so you're going to get to pronounce it for me.
Hyperthymesia.
I wrote down the word thigh, like chicken thigh. I was thinking that was how it was. But this total recall, I've seen there's a famous actress that used to be on Taxi, I think Mary Lou Henner. She has the ability to do this total recall with days, the actual days. Are you at that level too?
It depends. It's funny because hyperthymesia has a pretty wide range. Some people that remember every second, and that is extreme. Then I have less of that. I'm not at that point because those people sometimes it's a bother in their daily life. To me, it's not. It's not invasive like that. It's actually really helpful because I can see something and if I see a game design and I know exactly when I played that kind of game for the first time or when that specific type of design was in a game as if it was yesterday. So that's what hyperthymesia is for me. It's tied into games and music. Some other things could be around it. Could be weather, could be other situations happening. I could see some code and I can hear the music that I was listening to when I typed it. I could listen to music and sometimes it'll reference code that I was writing or a game I was making or a level I was designing. Things are always intertwined and connected multiple ways. I think code, music and code, they're like tied together, and level design. But I noticed it probably in the early 2000s. I remember all the details around the games I created for sure. I can look at any game I made and just say why I made it. There's always a reason for every single game. To me, it was just normal. I probably assumed that everybody remembered things the way I did. But it wasn't until the 2000s when I really realized I can recall a lot more information than other people, because people would say that they forgot something. What? How could you forget that? That's like yesterday, even if it was 10 years ago. 10 years is nothing. Come on, that was just 10 years ago. Don't you remember we were doing this and this and this and this? Since then, as the years go on, and I notice people forgetting the things from, say, 1990 or the 80s or whatever, and I just remember them. I absolutely know, yes, it is really different. And there are a few people that I know that remember just like I do. They remember their own things the same way. So it is interesting.
What music were you listening to in high school?
When I started high school, 1981, when I was a freshman, I was not into music at that point, but I heard music because I'm in California. Casey Kasem Top 40 is playing on the weekends. Everybody's hearing all of the music of just the regular radio, whether it's pop or rock or a combination. It was all of that. And in 82, basically the same thing, still in California. But then in 83, we moved to England at the very beginning of 83. Halfway through 83, we moved to a town called Needingworth. We were living in Swavesey, which is a different town. That was the first place we moved into. We moved to Needingworth after 6 months. And at the bus stop are kids in the neighborhood who also are Air Force kids, because we're living basically in the country, but living, I guess, in a small neighborhood where there are several U.S. Air Force defense contractors or enlisted people. The kids are there, obviously, and we all get on the same bus. And so at the bus stop, I meet these new guys. They immediately are like, hey, so what music do you listen to? I'm just like, whatever, not really listen to anything. And they're like, dude, you got to listen to heavy metal. Check out Black Sabbath. And they immediately get me Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and basically everything. And I take it home and just listen to it. And I'm just like, this is awesome. And that's when I got into heavy metal. It was halfway through 1983. And that was it, basically forever.
I don't have the hair to prove it like you, but I'm exactly the same. In fact, I was recently pitched. A publisher said, hey, do any of these authors look really interesting? And I scanned 100 different authors, major publisher, and I scanned it and I gave them a list of 5. Number 1 on my list, Geezer Butler. Please give me Geezer Butler. I don't think they will, but please give me Geezer.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
My first concert was a general admission concert, Van Halen, 1984. All I remember was the entire floor it was crazy. It was entirely insane. I used to think that my memory was wrong, that David Lee Roth started the concert jumping off the drum riser, doing the splits and landing and starting in Panama. Actually, now with YouTube, I can figure out he actually did do that.
Wow.
Yeah, cool
wow,
stuff.
That's pretty cool. My first one was Motley Crue, and Loudness opened for them.
Japanese.
Yeah. Akira Takasaki.
I can remember Japanese. Like, you got the names down, so...
Yeah, that's the guitarist. He's great.
I would give Black Sabbath the win, I would think. I love Ozzy's first 2 solo albums. They're great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have loved to have seen what happened if his guitarist did not die. We can go off on a tangent there forever.
I know.
Yeah, I'll be the only person that you're interviewing with who will ask you these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the unfolding of Doom, I'm curious also your 80s experience. Were you also going through the typical Nintendo 2600, 5200, all these different experiences? Were you a PC gamer guy? Was it just everything?
In the 80s, I was an Apple II person completely. There was a time in 80, 81, and 82 when I was playing at my friend Rob's house, and he had an Atari 800. The 800, I believe, came out in 79. So he had one in 1980. It was great to just play these games with hardware assistance. They were really nice. The Apple II was my world all day long for years. That went on until 85 when the NES came out. So I got the NES, and immediately I'm playing Kid Icarus and Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda in 86. Basically, lots of games on that console. I loved playing NES games. I got the SNES the second it came out in 1990. Immediately, I'm playing Super Mario World, F-Zero, and all of the Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, side-scrollers. Street Fighter, you name it. I was all over that. Super Nintendo was one of my favorite consoles of all time.
It's amazing because a lot of people listening probably went through the same playing experiences, but here you were playing and developing at the same time. I think it probably makes everybody a little bit jealous in hindsight. Like, hold on, why did I not make that jump? Why did I not be that curious kid? I got to share with you something really quick as you brought up the Apple II. Just a fun story. Maybe you've met him, but I was in a business lounge taking a red-eye flight from Saigon to Tokyo about 6 or 7 years ago. And I was with my parents, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and they wanted to use the power outlet, had this big bulky splitter and wanted to use my power outlet. And he said, "Can I split with you?" And I said, "Sure, as long as you give me a selfie." He started laughing. It was Wozniak.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I have a picture with Steve when I was at We Are Developers a few years ago. I've known him for a long time. He's really great.
It was one of those things where no one else in that business lounge had any idea who this nerdy guy was.
Amazing.
You know? Let me shift you up to Doom and the lead up to Doom, because here you are, you've got all this different experience and all these things that we've been talking about play a factor. I would guess, and you can explain it how you want to explain it, but being a Black Sabbath guy, it's not too hard of a jump for people that understand what Doom looks like to think, okay, I can see this guy was listening to a little Black Sabbath. I get it. Also, playing all these video games, you got all this different experience with the consoles, the different computers. And a lot of people might be thinking, well, it's tapped out. Nintendo owns it. Sega is going to come. Where's the opportunity? Where's the opening? And I think a lot of people look at life like this, where it's done already. I can't do it. But you and your team, your guys that you started id with, didn't think like this. Why don't you explain that setup to where you can even get to the place where you're going to launch this game that essentially changes video games?
Yeah, it was definitely a process that we went through over a few years, I'd say. When we started in software in 1990, it was because John Carmack came up with this smooth side-scrolling technique on the PC that had never been seen before, which put the PC squarely on par with the Super Nintendo, or at that time, just the original NES, and the Super Nintendo was possibly going to be released at the same time he was discovering this. But PC games had never had smooth scrolling like other platforms that were hardware assisted, like the Commodore 64 and the Atari 800, or dedicated game systems like the NES and the Super Nintendo. That was a really big deal when we came out with Commander Keen. I still have the reviews that came out at that time. It was huge. And when I saw the side scrolling, that was because I live games and I know every game and what games are doing on different platforms. And the PC at that time was my sole focus. I needed to get really good at the PC and I needed to know every game on it. That when I saw that, I knew the world had changed. Nobody had done that before. And that was a massive day to see that.
This is inside a small startup, essentially, a small four-man shop. You're seeing this.
Actually, it was at our day jobs. I brought John Carmack in and I brought Tom Hall over later at night, brought Adrian Carmack over. Inside of my office, I had started up a game disc. So we would basically make games and ship them every 2 months. Come up with an idea, create a game, ship it in 2 months, start another game. I was doing this and I hired them. I hired John Carmack and I brought Adrian over to do that, to make games together, which for me was a massive change from just making games by myself like most people. So having a team was really important, recognizing that when John made that breakthrough in September of 1990, that everything had changed, meaning that, yes, we were at a little company that no one would ever really see these games because the subscriber numbers were so low. We're talking about thousands, just a few thousand or whatever. No one would see it. So he knew that we needed to leave. We needed to start a company and get out of there and start using this technology and get it out so everyone could play these games on a PC. So people would know PCs can do what these dedicated game systems are doing, like the Super Nintendo. So we did do that. We knew that we were doing something the PC had never done before. And in 1991, we were building ourselves up for what the next step would be. We took 2 small steps by making our 2 first-person shooters. We didn't have that term back then. We were just making 3D games in first person. Hover Tank 1 was our first one, and Catacomb 3D was our second one during 1991. And Catacomb 3D was actually really significant because it was the very first texture mapped first person shooter created. Even though you shot fireballs from your hand and not guns, it was a first person shooter. Right after that, we started making some more Commander Keens. And one night, I basically just said to the guys, it was probably 1 a.m. because we were like that. 1 a.m, I just said, we can't make this game. We have to stop making this game. I don't want to make Commander Keen anymore. And we should be making a 3D game. That's where the future is. It's in 3D. We just shipped Catacomb 3D. We need to do another one and take it further than we did before and make it a better game. But if that's where games are going, that's where we need to be. And so we decided that we were going to make another 3D game. And I came up with the idea, which was to take the original Castle Wolfenstein idea from the Apple II and translate it into today's design, today meaning 1992, into 1992's design. That would be an amazing game. And everybody meaning just four of us, totally agreed that that would be incredible because we understood the amazing design and how much fun we had playing the original Castle Wolfenstein that came out in 1981. And so we had an immediate action plan and a design. We knew what we needed to do instantly. That was a turning point as well. Just the recognition that we should start a company. We should make a game and start a company with Commander Keen. The second big turn was we need to make 3D games again. We need to continue that and stop making our side scrollers. And the switch to Wolfenstein was a really, really big switch.
Your development process across different games and even some of the famous titles we're talking about right now today with this initial team at id, this was not necessarily kumbaya. You guys had disagreements. You had ups and downs. There was changes. There were stops. There were starts. There was, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this. There was a lot of that. It reminded me a little bit of, not making the comparison to the Beatles, but there were some strong personalities and some strong views.
It was not as contentious as people believe, which is one of the reasons why I think this book was really important to make. Because there are some conceptions out there that we were always butting heads and we weren't. There's no way we could make that many games that fast and be in disagreements all the time. We were of a like mind, which is why we worked so well together.
That's just the media strumming up some controversy.
Yeah, I think that is the thing that people have really over the years of, oh yeah, Romero and Carmack are always at each other. We work together unbelievably well. That's the thing that this book really gets across, is how we found in each other the perfect person to work with. In trust and the passion that we had we got things done fast because we completely agreed on how to go forward doing these things. Later, during Quake, there was a lot of pressure and tension because of how long it took to make the engine. Our goals diverged at that point, but before that point, it was pedal to the metal, getting shit done. It was awesome. It was so much fun. And all of us worked so well together. Adrian, as an artist, was incredible. This is someone who had never used a computer to make art. And we got him on our first game as he's learning how to click the mouse and put pixels on the screen with Slordax on September 1990. That's the first time that we have Adrian learning how to make pixel art. Tom Hall being able to just be free with creativity and not have to code, because Tom was a great programmer in assembly language for a decade. His real calling was to be a designer. He could just design all day long. Carmack being able to just focus only on the things that he cared about made it so he could laser in on these new techniques, programming techniques, and this new knowledge. And it was great. It was really great. We were hitting on all cylinders and did that for years. In 1991, we shipped 13 games.
I just saw a documentary about how Tetris came to be distributed.
That was a story.
Fascinating story. But here you guys, you're making video games. A lot of people are making video games. You're a very small shop. Can I assume that so much of your success was to ship very early good games that caught a viral wildfire before the larger players could respond?
That was definitely part of what we were doing. We were using, at the time, distribution techniques with shareware that was new for games. Shareware had been distributed differently before Scott Miller came along and had his idea for splitting a game into 3 pieces, putting one out there and selling the other 2. That was a really important marketing tactic at the time. That was new. The techniques that we're using to scroll the games was new. The design of our games was also very new. No side-scrolling game had the amount of secrets and fun hidden stuff that Commander Keen had when we shipped our first game. There was no such game on the PC. So we took what we had internalized of Shigeru Miyamoto's amazing lessons of design in Super Mario Brothers, and we put that in a PC game with our own characters and designed our own adventures, and we did it very quickly. So we made the first 3 Commander Keen games in 2.5 months. That's what we shipped on December 14th in 1990. Put the first one out there for free. People bought the other 2. People were downloading it from BBSs. They were paying for it over the phone with calling an 800 number or sending checks in the mail back in the day. And that's how Commander Keen got popular. At the end of 91, we released our second set of Keens that was far more advanced than the first ones. And that's the Keen 4, the shareware one that came out, is the one that most people remember. If they remember Commander Keen, they remember that free shareware Commander Keen 4 game, because it was, at the time, it was definitely the best scrolling action game on a PC.
I've watched several YouTube documentaries on the making of assorted Mario Brothers games. I don't remember the name that you just mentioned, but he's been featured, the Japanese designer. And those documentaries are just fascinating, what was going on inside Nintendo at the time. Likewise with you guys too. I think the interesting thing that must have also happened in your process as you were unfolding it is that you knew with where you were going to go, with the envelope you were going to push, Nintendo was not going to be your competitor.
Yeah, definitely. Nintendo wasn't, because we were on the PC, and Nintendo decided at the time that they would not be on the PC. And we found that out because when we made this early demo, that's called Dangerous Dave and Copyright Infringement, we put my character Dangerous Dave in Super Mario Brothers in 3, the first level of Super Mario Brothers 3. We did it on a PC, and then we spent a week actually making the first level of Super Mario Brothers 3 exactly the way it worked on the NES, making it work on the PC. And then we sent it to Nintendo, and they were very impressed, but they came back and said, we're not going to do this because we want our games to live on our own hardware, which is a really smart decision. So we knew that they weren't going to be on the PC, but we're on the PC, so we'll make our own characters. And that's where we went from there. I'm really glad that they turned us down.
They were also not really going to go to the level, when I'm talking about pushing the envelope, they were not going to go to the level, to use the term, the blood and guts that you guys were going to. They were not going to go to that place. They were more family friendly.
Yeah, they actually had a lot of rules around the depiction of any kind of violence and how that should look on their console. We actually did some games on the Super Nintendo, and we had to make sure that blood was green, and we had to change things to be more family friendly. Our games were rated M for mature. Actually, there were no video game ratings. And one interesting piece of trivia that's in the book is the fact that Wolfenstein 3D was the first voluntarily rated game, even though we did it tongue-in-cheek by calling it PC-13 for Profound Carnage. We put one of those PG-13 movie screen that used to come up in the 70s. We did that in the front of our game, same color and everything. We just said PC-13 Profound Carnage. We didn't know that we were actually voluntarily rating the game for the first time in game history, but that's what we did.
It's just amazing that a small software shop, without the hardware, without the distribution, could protect themselves to release these games, to bring in the revenue without being cannibalized or attacked by the big players. A little bit that also happened with Grand Theft Auto. They also protected themselves to some degree. It's amazing that the bigger players, I guess this happens almost every generation. People think the game is played out, so to speak, but then an opening appears, and you guys found an opening.
Yeah, we got offers to be bought out, and we just turned them all down because we really enjoyed having the freedom to do whatever we wanted to do. We didn't want someone else telling us what to do because we knew what we needed to do. We were so far ahead tech-wise and design-wise that if someone owned us, they would change what we're doing, which was doing the new thing, doing the next level of games. So it was great that we didn't sell out. Even during Quake, we were offered $100 million to sell the company. We turned it down.
First person shooter, to me, it doesn't bother me at all. It's creativity. I had a conversation with someone the other day working on a film script. This lady I respect a lot. I had a line in there where I said something, if you've got the guts to pull the trigger. She paused and I was like, okay, you don't like that line. She's like, well, I don't like that line. There's a lot of gun violence in America. And I know also there was a point in time when Doom came out and whatnot, and with the situation in Colorado, the school shooting years ago, tried to unfairly affix some blame to you guys. The idea of a first person shooter, I know it was iterative over many games and whatnot, but when did it become you and your partner's thing, where you guys knew you had this first person shooter and it was yours, at least for the time being?
That definitely had to happen with Wolfenstein, because we had 2 attempts earlier than that with Catacomb 3D and Hover Tank 1. And with Wolfenstein, we knew that since we're covering a game that was set during World War II, even though in Castle Wolfenstein, the original game, that there was just a pistol that you used, that when we were making our version of Castle Wolfenstein, we would put even more guns in there. And that was a machine gun and it was a Gatling gun. Even though that was a pretty small amount of weapons for a game at that time, that was all people needed. Really, the Gatling gun was what you used to just cruise the whole thing. And the game was really about speed. The focus on that game was speed. It really wasn't so much on the violence, because we didn't go over the top with blood and try and make it look gory or any of that. To us, that wasn't the fun part. The fun part was being able to hit the target and move on to the next target. And can you do that quickly? Can you get through that room? And can you get the key? Can you find the door? We're still playing maze games from the whole 80s, where so many maze games. Pac-Man was a maze game. And really, Wolfenstein is a maze game, except you go through it differently.
The original adventure on the 2600.
Yeah, the maze game. So maze games have been around for a really long time. With Wolfenstein, it was definitely something people hadn't seen before. As game developers who were in Texas, which is a state that loves its guns, there is a very big difference between video games and real guns. And gun violence is nearing epidemic level in the United States, but I don't believe that video games contribute to it. And there are a lot of studies that support that.
I was going to say, I remember as a kid, I had, I don't know how many plastic exact specification black M16s I had in the 70s that we would go play guns with. None of my friends have turned out to be shooters or killers, nor have I. I think this is one of the conversations that people don't like to have. I think men can have this conversation, but it feels like sometimes when other folks, unnamed women, have this conversation, they immediately throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whereas I think men grew up with this and it was fun. We weren't thinking about trying to kill each other. It was just, as you say, these were games, whether these are games you're playing in your backyard or games you're playing on the screen. In hindsight, people want to affix blame everywhere. It's not necessarily fair, in my opinion.
The proof is really in the statistics. People play games all over the world, and this does not happen all over the world. So I don't know the answer, but I don't think games are the problem.
I agree. We could talk infinitely about different little issues. Again, people will have to read. But let me take you up the current. Do you feel like you've unwound the spring some, or do you feel like the same guy you were developing games in the 80s? Because the author of 8 books, sometimes it's hard to keep creating. How do you feel these days?
Well, geez, I've never run out of ideas. I'm just lucky that way, I guess. I love games. I think that maybe if I was a person who didn't play anything new, didn't explore what was out there, that I could get wrapped up in nostalgia and just be like, games nowadays, they suck compared to the games when I was growing up. But the games today are the most amazing thing that anyone could ever imagine. There are so many amazing lessons in games today, especially indie games from independent game developers, where this is just a small group of people or even one person taking an idea that they've had for who knows where it came from. They make something that really presents a unique message or a unique game mechanic, or something new is added to the game design lexicon.
John, you don't have to hide anything. Would you like to make some recommendations? I would love to hear them, because I have not kept up with everything under the sun. And since I got you here, I would love for you to tell me what string I should go pull on, what experiences I should go have, because you have lived and breathed this for your career. Where should we go as an audience these days? We've got all these experiences with 70s, 80s, 90s games and whatnot, your first-person shooters games. Where would people really get enthralled these days, so to speak?
Geez. Okay. So with indie games, one of the great things at the very beginning of the industry, because of limited technology, adventure games were really big back at the start. And people really liked adventure games. But when you could actually get graphics moving around on the screen, the text went away and became graphical and became things moving around. So adventure games took a back seat for a while. There's a whole range of games that people can play. Not everybody wants to play something that's fast action. A lot of people like to take their time before they even make a move. Those early games, those adventure games, nowadays they're called narrative games. And narrative games are a huge market, and they're also very inventive. These indies have been trying to figure out how to tell a story in a new way, how to do that in an innovative way. There's a game called What Remains of Edith Finch that came out several years ago that is a really great way to look at how you can present a story in a way that you're just walking through an environment and the story is all around you. And it uses the latest technology, it uses Unreal Engine, and it looks amazing. It's voiced and it's just incredible to experience. You've never seen anything like it before. You got to try What Remains of Edith Finch, or you should try Her Story, which is from Sam Barlow. It's a really great game where you're watching video sequences and you're trying to put them together into a narrative that creates a story. A game called The Artful Escape that came out probably last year before is really, really amazing. It is definitely an adventure, a musical adventure that you're taking. It will blow your mind. It's so inventive.
Will filmmakers and video game designers ultimately become the same thing?
Well, they are. They're going back and forth between their media types. But if you want to see the latest, greatest indie games or just the latest, best games, check out BAFTA games, because all the nominees there are worth checking out. Whether they win or not, they're really, really great games. You can just get online and go to BAFTA and check out the game nominees and just see what the latest and greatest stuff is and download them, try them out. There's a lot of really great stuff out there. And nowadays, there's a lot of games that don't take long to play because people like short time period games. They don't want to play something for 70 hours. They just want a few hours, the game's over.
I would be amiss if I didn't ask you, given your entrepreneurial success, if you gave an answer as to why you love being an entrepreneur.
Well, the nice thing about being an entrepreneur is you get to just come up with your own ideas and make it happen. A lot of times people are just told what they got to do. Being entrepreneurs, you have to have these ideas for what you think people would really like, or you have an idea for which way things should go, exploring the horizon of games and pushing that horizon.
It's often what you like, though. It's what you like, and you run with that. There's some of that to it?
Well, yeah, because I've played so many games and I like a lot of games that everybody else likes. There's a game that I love and it is critically acclaimed. That's great. That means I know what people like, I hope. When I continue making games and I make things that I like personally, and I think that other people would like, that's where it comes from. I think people will like this. And there still is a lot of research around different parts of games. Nowadays, there's a lot of work around the research of, is this a good feature to put in a game? How many other games have this feature? But if it's brand new and innovative, you got to run with it. If there's no way that you're going to get stats around a new feature in a game and you think it'd be really cool, you put it in to see that it works. And there's a lot of testing during game development, user research, where you have players playing your game and giving feedback about it, candid feedback. And that's really, really valuable to know whether you're on the right track or not, or if you presented your idea correctly.
So from a really interesting childhood to a Pac-Man fan, to a Black Sabbath fan, to being able to make some nice pocket change from video games. That's a fun career. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Seriously, I'm envious.
That's what I've always wanted to do. So I just kept on trying to do it.
Hey, the book, Doom Guy, Life in First Person, people can find on Amazon, all that fun stuff. Is there a place that you would like to send people? Is there a website or anything?
Yeah, Romero.com. If you go to Romero.com, that's our website. We have a lot of other stuff there. Also, local booksellers have it. Wherever you live, go to the local bookseller and see if they have that in stock or ask for it to come in stock, because we do like to support our local booksellers as well. Bookstores are an important place for people to hang out and find really cool stuff to read. You can basically get it anywhere, though.
I got to tell you, on a conversation like this, you already know I didn't walk in with 50 questions because you're looking at my face the whole time. I hope you enjoy this style because I do too. I just want things to be a nice conversation, and you never know what a guest is going to give and what they might say. And so the idea of trying to read a list of questions to me seems impossible.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been really fun answering whatever you decide to throw at me.
You seem cool. You're a little bit of the same headspace, so we're okay. We're okay.
Yeah.
John, I appreciate it. Hopefully we can talk again in the future, maybe. So have a good day, man.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.